The silence in my Arlington Heights home felt foreign after decades of battlefield chaos. Standing in my own living room, I ran my fingers along the mantelpiece, tracing the dust that had gathered on framed family photos, moments I'd missed while serving overseas. My uniform felt heavy that day, weighed down by medals that suddenly seemed meaningless. 40 years of my life dedicated to my country, and for what? To come home to this empty shell of what I once believed was a loving family. I'm Colonel James Harrington, United States Marine Corps. At 68 years old, my body bears the scars of Vietnam, Desert Storm, and Afghanistan, but none of those wounds cut as deep as what awaited me upon my return home. They say war changes a man. What they don't tell you is that while you're changing, life back home doesn't pause. It moves on without you. Sometimes it moves into the arms of someone else. The first indication something was wrong came when I called from the airport. Vanessa answered with hesitation in her voice. "James? Today?" I thought, never mind. Yes, we'll be ready. The call ended before I could tell her how much I'd missed her, how I'd carried her picture through jungles and deserts, how thoughts of coming home to her had kept me alive when mortars lit up the night sky. My taxi pulled up to our 2-story colonial, the house my military salary had paid for, where we'd raised 3 children during my brief periods of leave. Through the window, I saw unfamiliar suitcases being hastily moved from the entryway. A man's jacket, too large to be my son Michael's, hung on the coat rack I'd built by hand before my second deployment. I still remember the weight of my duffel bag as I slung it over my shoulder one final time. 4 decades of military precision had taught me to recognize patterns, to sense when something wasn't right. Every instinct honed by years of combat told me I was walking into an ambush. Vanessa greeted me at the door with a perfunctory hug, her body stiff against my uniform. Her perfume was different, stronger, more expensive than what I remembered. Behind her, a man appeared in the hallway, tall and muscular, wearing a tight polo shirt with Semper Fidelis fitness emblazoned across it. "James, this is Troy Matthews. He's been helping me stay fit while you were away." Troy's handshake was deliberately firm, a silent challenge. His smile never reached his eyes as he said, "The Colonel returns. Vanessa has told me so much about you." I'd faced enemy fire without flinching, but something in his familiar tone made my blood run cold. The way he moved through my house, knowing where everything was kept. The subtle territorial gestures, his hand briefly touching the small of my wife's back, his shoes placed neatly by the door, as if they belonged there. That night, after Troy left with a promise to see you tomorrow for our usual session, Vanessa sat me down at our kitchen table. The same table where I'd once helped my children with homework during leaves, where I'd written countless letters during deployments. "James, we need to talk," she began, twisting her wedding ring, the simple gold band I'd saved 3 months' salary to buy before my first tour. "Things have changed while you were away. I've changed." The confession spilled out clinically, as if she were describing a medical procedure rather than the dissolution of 45 years of marriage. Troy was more than a personal trainer. He had been her lover for the past 3 years. He understood her needs. He was present. He made her feel alive again. "You were a ghost, James," she said, eyes hardening when I remained silent. "A name on Christmas cards, a voice on staticky phone calls. What did you expect?" I expected honor. I expected the vows we took to mean something. I expected that the mother of my children would understand that my absence wasn't abandonment. It was sacrifice. Instead of saying any of this, I asked, "Do the children know?" Her laugh was sharp enough to cut. "No? James, they were the ones who encouraged me to find happiness again. Elizabeth helped me redecorate the bedroom, your room, to suit Troy's taste. Michael goes golfing with him every Sunday. Even Sarah, my youngest. My quiet, thoughtful daughter, who used to send me drawings in Afghanistan. Even Sarah thinks it's for the best," Vanessa finished, her voice softening in what I recognized as practiced sympathy. "They're coming over tomorrow for dinner to welcome you home, but they wanted me to prepare you, Things have changed. They have lives you know nothing about. That night, I slept in the guest room, surrounded by boxes of my possessions that had been neatly removed from the master bedroom. Military efficiency in the dismantling of my marriage. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of a house that no longer recognized me as its owner. The family dinner the next evening was an exercise in psychological warfare. My children, now adults with spouses and children of their own, treated me with the detached politeness reserved for distant relatives. Elizabeth, my eldest at 42, a corporate attorney, kissed my cheek without meeting my eyes. Michael, 38, checked his expensive watch repeatedly, making it clear my homecoming was an inconvenience in his busy schedule. "So, Dad," Elizabeth said as we ate the meal Vanessa had catered rather than cooked, "what are your plans now? The condo market for seniors is quite competitive these days." Before I could answer, Michael jumped in. "I've prepared some figures on your pension, Dad. Frankly, it's not going to go far in today's economy. Maybe we should look into some part-time work for you. Security guard, perhaps? Something to keep you busy." They spoke about me as if I were a problem to be managed, not a father who had missed his children's graduations, weddings, and the births of his grandchildren because he was serving his country. "Actually," I began, "I thought I might—" "James has always been independent," Vanessa interrupted, sharing a knowing look with Troy, who had joined us uninvited. "But we need to be realistic about his situation." "Exactly," Elizabeth nodded. "Dad's generation wasn't big on financial planning. They just expected pensions to cover everything." The conversation continued around me, my future being decided by people who viewed my 4 decades of service as a character flaw rather than a sacrifice. Each dismissive comment, each condescending smile chipped away at the image I'd held of my loving family, waiting faithfully for my return. It was during dessert, a store-bought cake, not the homemade apple pie Vanessa knew was my favorite, that Troy casually draped his arm across the back of my wife's chair and said, "Maybe James could help out at the gym. We have a senior fitness program starting next month." The table erupted in laughter, as if the thought of me, a Marine who had led men half my age through mountain terrain in Afghanistan just months earlier, needing a senior fitness program, was the height of comedy. That was the moment something hardened inside me. Not anger. Marines don't have the luxury of uncontrolled emotion. No, what crystallized was resolve. The same cold, focused determination that had kept me alive in combat zones across the globe. Because what my family didn't know, what they couldn't possibly suspect as they laughed at the broken old soldier before them, was that Colonel James Harrington had never been just a Marine, and my deployments had involved more than just combat missions. They saw an old man with a modest pension. They didn't see the empire I had built while they were dismissing my sacrifices as outdated notions of duty and honor. As I looked around at their expensive watches, designer clothes, and the casual cruelty in their eyes, I made a decision. They would learn exactly who they had been so quick to discard, but not yet. First, I would endure their humiliation. I would play the role they had cast me in, the obsolete veteran, struggling to adjust to civilian life, because a good military strategy requires patience. It requires allowing your enemy to believe they have the upper hand while you position your forces. And make no mistake, in that moment, as Troy refilled my wife's wine glass with the casual intimacy of a long-term lover, as my children smirked at each other over my head, they became the opposition. They had no idea what was coming, no idea that the man they were so eagerly pushing toward a retirement home controlled assets that could buy and sell their comfortable lives 100 times over. No idea that their comfortable existences, Elizabeth's law partnership, Michael's investment firm, even Troy's fitness center, all unknowingly operated under the shadow of my influence. I took a sip of water and forced a smile as my grandson asked innocently, "Grandpa, why do you have so many medals if they don't give you money?" The table laughed again, but this time I joined them, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that in war, As in life, victory doesn't always go to the strongest. Sometimes it goes to the most patient, and I had just begun to fight. The weeks following that disastrous homecoming dinner became a masterclass in humiliation. I rented a modest one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood far beneath the social status my family had grown accustomed to. The place was clean but sparse. Military corners on the bed, minimal furniture, walls bare except for my service photos and the American flag I'd carried through 3 combat zones. To them, it confirmed their narrative, the sad old soldier who couldn't adjust to civilian life. Little did they know that 10 miles away, in a sleek high-rise overlooking the Potomac, I maintained an executive office under a different name. There, I quietly directed the operations of Sentinel Shield, the security firm that had made me a billionaire several times over. My routine became calculated performance art. I drove a 15-year-old pickup truck to my weekly dinners with the family, wearing the same rotation of 3 button-down shirts and khaki pants. I accepted their charity, Michael insisting on paying for dinner, Elizabeth offering to help with my resume, as if 4 decades as a Marine officer left me unqualified for meaningful work. Dad, have you considered the VA's mental health services? Elizabeth asked one evening, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. Many veterans struggle with the transition. We were sitting in an upscale restaurant where a single meal cost more than what they believed was my weekly budget. Michael had selected it deliberately, I suspected, to highlight the contrast between their prosperity and my apparent decline. "I'm fine, Elizabeth," I replied, cutting my steak with the precision that had become second nature after decades of military discipline. "Are you, though?" Michael pressed, exchanging glances with his sister. "Mum says you call the house at odd hours, asking about old photographs and documents." What I couldn't tell them was that I wasn't calling out of nostalgia or confusion. I was methodically documenting every asset that rightfully belonged to me, assets that Vanessa and Troy had been systematically liquidating since before my return. "Just trying to preserve some memories," I said instead, playing directly into their perception of me as a man clinging to the past. That night, after they dropped me at my apartment building with condescending pats on the shoulder, I waited 30 minutes, changed into a tailored suit, and took my private car to meet with General William Crawford at the Pentagon. While my family believed I was sitting alone in a sparse apartment watching old war documentaries, I was securing a $300 million defense contract that would increase my company's value by another $1 billion. The betrayal cut deepest on the personal front. 3 weeks after my return, I visited my old neighborhood barbershop, only to overhear 2 men discussing my situation. "Yeah, Harrington's wife has been with that trainer for years," one said. "Everyone knew except the poor bastard overseas. Guy's a decorated colonel, but couldn't see what was happening in his own house." I sat motionless under the barber's cape as they continued, learning that my humiliation wasn't just family gossip, it was neighborhood entertainment. The colonel's wife and her boy, Toy, the pathetic old veteran who came home to nothing. That same afternoon, I received a call from Sarah, my youngest. Of all my children, she had shown the least outright contempt, though her distance was perhaps more painful because we had once been close. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "I was wondering if you'd like to come to James Jr.'s baseball game this weekend. He's playing pitcher for the first time." A small olive branch, the chance to see my grandson play. I accepted immediately. The local baseball field brought back memories of teaching Michael to throw a fastball during my rare leaves between deployments. I arrived early, taking a seat in the bleachers with a small gift for my grandson, a baseball glove I'd spent hours breaking in for him. Sarah arrived with her husband and James Jr., but they weren't alone. Vanessa came too, with Troy in tow, both dressed in expensive athleisure wear that made my department store clothes look even more dated. They didn't sit near me. Instead, they took prominent seats behind home plate, where Troy immediately began loudly giving professional-sounding advice to my grandson. "Remember what we practiced, JJ. he called out, using a nickname I'd never heard before. Elbow up, just like I showed you. My grandson waved enthusiastically at Troy before taking the mound. When he pitched his first strike, it was to Troy he looked for approval, not to me, the grandfather he barely knew. At the seventh inning stretch, I approached with my gift. I thought you might like this, I said, offering the glove. It's the right size for a pitcher. James Jr. looked uncertainly at his mother, who tensed visibly. That's thoughtful, Dad, Sarah said carefully. But Troy already got him a professional-grade glove. It's what the college players use. Show Grandpa your glove, JJ, Troy called over, his arm casually draped around Vanessa's shoulders. My grandson pulled out a glove that probably cost more than my entire military uniform. The name Matthews had been embossed on the side, not Harrington. Troy's teaching me to pitch like the pros, James Jr. explained, his excitement genuine. He says I could get a scholarship if I keep practicing. I forced a smile. That's wonderful. I just thought, we appreciate the gesture, James, Vanessa interrupted, her tone making it clear that my gift was superfluous. But Troy has been coaching JJ for 2 years now. They have their system. I nodded and pocketed the rejected glove. As I turned to leave, I heard Troy stage whisper to my grandson, "Good job, kid. Sometimes you have to humor the old-timers, right?" Their laughter followed me back to my seat, where I watched the remainder of the game alone. These small cruelties accumulated over months. Michael forgetting to invite me to his company gala, then claiming the invitation must have been lost in the mail when I called to wish him luck. Elizabeth introducing me to her law partners as my father, who's still figuring out email, though I had managed classified communication systems during my service. The most calculated humiliation came at Thanksgiving, 6 months after my return. Dinner was at Elizabeth's palatial home in McLean, Virginia, ironically, a property owned by one of my shell corporations, though she had no idea she was effectively paying rent to her disregarded father. I arrived to find 20 guests already seated, most of them strangers to me. My place setting was at a small table in the corner with the 3 youngest grandchildren, far from the main conversation. "We thought you'd be more comfortable away from all the shop talk, Dad," Elizabeth explained when I questioned the arrangement. "Michael's bringing some important clients and, well, your war stories tend to make people uncomfortable." I took my assigned seat, watching as Troy carved the turkey in my place, received my family's thanks for his service to them. He wore a cashmere sweater I recognized, one I had sent Michael from Italy during a NATO deployment. During dessert, Michael clinked his glass for attention. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said, beaming. "First, I want to thank Mom and Troy for hosting us all at their beautiful home. Their home, not our home, not my home. And I'm excited to share that Westridge Capital has just approved our expansion into government contracting. We'll be bidding on defense contracts starting next quarter." The table erupted in applause. I alone knew that Westridge Capital was a subsidiary of my own company, and that Michael's expansion existed solely because I had arranged it, curious to see what my son would do with the opportunity. "Defense contracting is quite competitive," I remarked during a lull in conversation. "Do you have connections at the Pentagon?" Michael's smile tightened. "Dad, with all due respect, the defense industry has changed since your day. It's not about who you know wearing stars and stripes. It's about innovative financial solutions." "I see," I replied mildly. "Just thought I might introduce you to some people I served with." The table fell awkwardly silent until Troy laughed. "I think the Colonel's connections are probably all in retirement homes by now, right, Mike?" The tension broke as everyone chuckled, relieved to return to the comfortable narrative. Old James, out of touch, living in the past, while they marched boldly into the future. After dinner, I overheard Elizabeth and Michael in the kitchen. "How long do you think he can afford that apartment?" Elizabeth asked. "Mom says his pension barely covers the rent. 3 months, maybe 4, Michael replied. "I've been looking at some veterans' assistance living options. Nothing too depressing, but affordable. Does he have any savings at all?" "If he does, he hasn't touched it. His checking account never goes above 3,000, according to Mom." They were monitoring my bank account, the only one they knew about. The account I deliberately kept just above the level of financial concern, just below the threshold of independence. "Well, he can't move in with any of us," Elizabeth said firmly. "I have the girls to think about, and your place is already crowded with the renovation." Troy suggested he could move back into the pool house at Mom's, Michael offered. "Keep him close but separate. And have him moping around making Mom feel guilty? No thanks." They discussed my future as if I were a burden to be managed, not the man whose military salary had paid for Elizabeth's law school, Michael's first car, the family vacations they now reminisced about with selective memory, always emphasizing Vanessa's efforts, never my contributions. That night, alone in my apartment, I made a decision. The time for reconnaissance was over. I had gathered enough intelligence on their characters, their motivations, their vulnerabilities. It was time to develop my counteroffensive. I called Bobby Maxwell, my oldest friend, and the only person who knew my true financial situation. "They're planning to put me in assisted living," I told him, recounting the conversation I'd overheard. Bobby's laugh rumbled through the phone. "Assisted living? For the man who owns half of Northern Virginia? When are you going to drop the hammer on these people, Jim?" "Not yet," I replied. "I'm waiting for the right moment." "The right moment was months ago," Bobby argued. "You've let them humiliate you long enough. Your own wife is living in your house with another man, spending your money, and your kids are planning to put you in a home. What more do you need to see?" What Bobby didn't understand was that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. I needed to be certain, beyond any doubt, that my family's betrayal was complete and deliberate before I took action. "I need one more piece of the puzzle," I told him. "I need to know if Sarah is like the others." Sarah, my youngest, the daughter who'd sent me drawings in Afghanistan. The one who'd at least invited me to her son's baseball game, even if she'd let Troy take my place in my grandson's affections. "And if she is," Bobby asked, "if she's just as bad as the rest of them, then I execute the plan," I said simply, "and God help them all." The following week I arranged to meet Sarah for coffee, just the two of us, away from Troy's influence and her siblings' watchful eyes. I selected a quiet cafe near her workplace, arriving early to secure a corner table. Sarah looked surprised when she saw me dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and pressed slacks, a step up from the deliberately shabby appearance I'd maintained since my return. "You look nice, Dad," she said, genuinely. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I just wanted to talk. It's been a while since we had time alone." For the first hour, our conversation remained superficial. James Jr.'s baseball progress, her work as a teacher, neutral topics that wouldn't trigger the family's prescribed narrative about my mental state. Then, I gently steered us toward more substantial matters. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me," I began carefully. "Did you know about your mother and Troy before I came home?" She looked down at her coffee cup, her fingers nervously tracing its rim. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "We all did." "How long? 3 years? Maybe 4? She met my eyes with visible discomfort. "Dad, you have to understand. Mom was lonely. You were gone so much." The same justification I'd heard repeatedly, as if my service were a personal choice rather than a duty. "And the decision to remove my things from the house before I returned, was that your idea too?" She had the grace to look ashamed. "That was Elizabeth's suggestion. She thought it would be easier than having a confrontation with all your stuff still there." I nodded, absorbing this final confirmation of their coordinated betrayal. "And now they're discussing assisted living options for me. Have you been part of those conversations too?" Sarah's eyes widened. "How did you—" "I overheard Elizabeth and Michael at Thanksgiving," I explained. "They seemed quite concerned about my financial situation." "Dad, it's not like that," she protested. "They're worried about you. We all are. You seem so lost since you came back." The performance I'd been giving had worked, perhaps too well. "I see," I said, keeping my voice even. "And what do you think, Sarah? Do you believe I need to be in assisted living?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. My youngest, my once faithful daughter, had also accepted the family's narrative about my decline. "I think you need help adjusting," she finally said. "The military was your whole life for so long, and now, well, it must be hard to find your place." I allowed a calculated vulnerability to show in my expression. "You're right about that. It has been difficult." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "That's why we're trying to help, Dad. Maybe if you let Mom and Troy assist with your finances, get you set up somewhere more suitable." The trap was set. Now to see if she would fall into it as her siblings had. "Actually," I said slowly, "there is something I've been meaning to ask you. I have a small investment from before my last deployment. Nothing significant, but it might help with my rent for a few more months. The problem is, it's tied up in some paperwork, and my name can't be on the documents because of, well, some VA benefit complications." I watched her expression carefully as I continued. "I was wondering if you might put your name on it instead, just temporarily until I sort things out." It was the same offer I'd made to Elizabeth and Michael separately, a test of character disguised as a request for help, a chance for each of my children to choose integrity over personal gain. Elizabeth had immediately offered to manage the investment for me, then transferred the modest sum I'd provided into her personal account the same day. Michael had gone further, suggesting we leverage the investment by taking out a loan against it in my name, with him as the beneficiary. Now I waited to see what Sarah would do. Would she follow her siblings' example, or would she be the one child who remembered the values I'd tried to instill? Sarah's expression clouded. "What kind of investment, Dad? And why can't your name be on it?" "It's complicated," I said vaguely. "Military pensions, disability considerations. But it's completely legal, just a regulatory loophole." She withdrew her hand from mine. "I don't know, Dad. It sounds... If there's nothing wrong with it, why do you need my name instead of yours?" A glimmer of hope. She was questioning, not immediately agreeing like her siblings. "You're right to ask," I acknowledged. "Tell you what, think about it. Talk to Elizabeth if you want a second opinion. She's the legal expert after all." Sarah nodded, looking relieved at the reprieve. "I will. And Dad, we really do want what's best for you. I hope you know that." As she left the cafe, I wondered if she meant those words. I would soon find out. If she called Elizabeth, if she agreed to the scheme after consulting her sister, I would have my answer. And then nothing would stop what was coming. 3 days after my coffee with Sarah, she called. Her voice was tight, controlled, the same tone I'd heard countless young officers use when delivering bad news to a superior. "Dad, I talked to Elizabeth about that investment situation," she began without preamble. "She says she's already helping you with something similar." "Did she give you the details?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Enough to understand what you're asking." The disappointment in her voice was palpable. "Dad, Elizabeth thinks, we all think, that maybe you're getting confused about your finances. She suggested we meet with the VA counselor together, go over everything with a professional." The final test had yielded its result. Sarah had indeed consulted Elizabeth, who had recognized the identical scheme and moved to protect her own interests, rather than question why her father was making such requests. "I see," I said, allowing a heavy pause. "Thank you for being honest, Sarah. Dad, please don't be upset. We're just worried." "I'm not upset," I interrupted gently. "I understand completely." And I did. The reconnaissance phase of my operation was complete. I now had confirmation that all 3 of my children had chosen self-interest over integrity. Even Sarah, my last hope for redemption within the family, had failed the test. That evening, I made another call, this time to General William Crawford at his private residence. "It's time," I told him without preamble. "Have your people ready in 3 weeks at the anniversary party." "Are you certain, Jim?" he asked, his voice grave. "Once this is in motion, there's no turning back." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied. "They've made their choices. Now they'll live with the consequences." The next 3 weeks marked the most difficult phase of my operation. I had to maintain the facade of the struggling, confused veteran while finalizing the intricate details of what would happen at Vanessa's carefully planned 45th anniversary celebration, a party she was throwing for herself with Troy as co-host, to which I had been invited as an apparent courtesy. I continued my performance flawlessly. I accepted Elizabeth's condescending offer to review my finances, providing her with the manufactured bank statements that showed my dwindling resources. I nodded appreciatively when Michael suggested a part-time security job at a local mall. I watched silently as Troy wore my clothes, drove my car, and played father to my grandchildren. Each indignity was catalogued, each betrayal noted with military precision. Not for revenge. Marines aren't taught to seek revenge. We're taught to complete the mission, and my mission now was justice. The breaking point came 2 weeks before the anniversary party. I had stopped by the house, my house, to collect some personal items Vanessa had discovered in the attic. Military memorabilia, photographs, medals I'd earned in combat. Things that had once represented honor and sacrifice, now relegated to dusty boxes marked James's old stuff. I knocked on the door of my own home like a visitor. Troy answered, wearing my bathrobe, a gift from Vanessa on our 30th anniversary. He didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "James," he said with manufactured joviality, "Vanessa's getting those boxes for you. Come in, have a beer." He led me to my own living room, now redecorated in a modern style that erased any evidence of my existence. My recliner, the one I'd dreamed of during desert deployments, was gone, replaced by a sleek leather sectional. The built-in bookshelves where I'd kept my military history collection now displayed Troy's fitness trophies and self-help books. "Like what we've done with the place?" Troy asked, handing me a beer in a glass I didn't recognize. "Vanessa says it was stuck in the 90s before." Before I could respond, my grandson James Jr. burst into the room, baseball glove in hand. He stopped short when he saw me. "Hi, Grandpa," he said with the awkward politeness of a child greeting a seldom-seen relative. "Hey, sport," I replied, smiling genuinely. Whatever sins his parents and grandmother had committed, the boy was innocent. "How's the pitching coming along?" Before he could answer, Troy interjected. "Show your grandpa that fastball we've been working on, JJ. He used to play a little ball himself, right, James?" The diminishment was deliberate, reducing my college baseball scholarship and position as starting pitcher to playing a little ball. But it was the JJ that bothered me more. James Harrington III had been named for me and my father before me. The nickname stripped away that connection, that lineage. My grandson's face lit up as he looked at Troy. "Can we use the pitching machine you got me?" "You bet, kiddo," Troy replied, ruffling his hair with casual familiarity. "Let me just check with your grandmother about those boxes for Grandpa first." He disappeared down the hallway, calling for Vanessa with the comfortable tone of a man in his own home. James Jr. looked at me uncertainly. "Troy says you were in the war." "Several wars," I corrected gently. "I was a Marine." "Troy says the Marines are just soldiers who think they're special." The statement hit like a physical blow, not because of Troy's dismissal of the Corps, I'd heard worse from better men, but because my own grandson was parroting it without understanding the insult. "The Marines have a saying," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "First to fight." "Do you know what that means?" He shook his head. "It means we go where the danger is greatest. We lead the way." "Like superheroes?" he asked, interest flickering in eyes that matched mine exactly. "More like, JJ, let's get that pitching machine set up," Troy called from the back door, interrupting our moment of connection. My grandson was gone in an instant, racing toward the backyard and the man who had usurped my place in his life. Vanessa appeared with a single cardboard box. "This is all I could find," she said, not meeting my eyes. The rest must have been lost in the move. The move had been from the master bedroom to the guest room, then to the pool house, and finally out of the home entirely. Each stage strategically timed to coincide with my deployments, so that by the time I returned for good, my erasure was complete. I accepted the box without comment, knowing full well that my silver star, my purple hearts, and most of my service photographs were missing. They would be in a landfill somewhere, discarded like the memories they represented. "The anniversary party is coming up," Vanessa said as she walked me to the door. "Elizabeth thought it might be better if you came just for the dinner portion, not the full reception. Some of the guests might be uncomfortable. You know how you can get when you talk about Afghanistan. How I could get, as if my experiences in combat were an embarrassing conversational tick rather than the reason I'd been absent from so many family gatherings." "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll be there for dinner only." Her relief was visible. "Thank you, James. It's important to me that this goes well. Troy has invited some influential clients, and Michael's bringing potential investors." "Of course," I replied, hefting the pitifully light box of my remaining possessions. We wouldn't want my war stories to disrupt Troy's business opportunities. She flinched at the rare note of sarcasm, then quickly recovered. "It's not like that. We're just trying to move forward. All of us. All of them. Moving forward. In my house, with my money, erasing every trace of my existence while simultaneously planning to place me in assisted living when my pension ran out." "I'll see you at the party, Vanessa," I said, turning away before she could see the resolve hardening in my eyes. That night, I opened the box in my apartment. As I'd suspected, it contained only miscellaneous items, old uniform parts, a few faded photographs, books I'd collected overseas. Nothing of true significance. I reached for the secure phone I kept hidden in my bedside table and called Bobby. "How are the final preparations coming?" I asked when he answered. "Everything's in place," he confirmed. "Crawford's team has compiled all the evidence. The financial forensics are complete. Elizabeth and Michael's activities have been thoroughly documented. The federal warrants are ready, just waiting for Crawford's signature." And Troy. Bobby's satisfaction was audible. "That's the best part. His real name is Anton Trofimov, former Russian military intelligence, been working deep cover for years. The intelligence community has had suspicions, but couldn't prove anything until we started digging. The confirmation of Troy's true identity didn't surprise me. My instincts about people had been honed through decades of command decisions where lives hung in the balance. I'd sensed something off about him from our first handshake. "Vanessa?" I asked, the words still painful to speak. "Completely in the dark about his real identity," Bobby confirmed. "But the financial trail is clear. She's been helping him access your old service records, your contacts at the Pentagon. Whether she knew why he wanted that information or not, she's been complicit in espionage." I closed my eyes, absorbing this final betrayal. My wife of 45 years had not only replaced me in our bed, but had potentially compromised national security in the process. "The anniversary party is in 12 days, I said. "Everything needs to be in place by then." "It will be," Bobby assured me. "Jim, are you absolutely sure about this? These are still your children, your grandchildren. Once this happens, there's no going back to normal family holidays." "Normal family holidays," I repeated with a bitter laugh. "Bobby, did I tell you about Thanksgiving? They seated me at the children's table. My own daughter called my combat experiences uncomfortable for her dinner guests. My son is planning my financial collapse with the same tactical precision I once used to plan military operations." I understand the anger. "It's not anger," I corrected him. "It's justice. They made their choices knowing exactly who I was and what I'd sacrificed for them. Now they'll face the consequences knowing exactly who I've become." The days before the anniversary party passed with excruciating slowness. I maintained my role as the struggling veteran, even accepting a loan from Michael that I knew was designed to create leverage over me when the time came to suggest assisted living. I visited Sarah's house once more, making a final attempt to connect with my grandson. Troy was there, naturally, conducting a special training session in the backyard with a pitching machine that cost more than most families' monthly mortgage. "Grandpa!" James Jr. called when he saw me, with slightly more enthusiasm than before. "Watch this!" He threw a respectable fastball that thudded into the backstop with satisfying force. "Looking good, sport," I said with genuine pride. "You've got a natural arm." "Troy says it's all about the training," Sarah interjected quickly, as if afraid I might claim some genetic credit for my grandson's ability. "Troy says a lot of things," I replied mildly. My comment earned me a sharp look from Sarah and a warning glance from Troy, who jogged over to insert himself into the conversation. "James, good to see you," he lied smoothly. "JJ's coming along great, isn't he? We're talking about private coaching next year, maybe some showcase tournaments. On a military pension," I asked innocently. "That sounds expensive." An uncomfortable silence fell. We all knew who would be paying for those tournaments, those coaching sessions. The same person who had paid for everything else in this family for decades. "We'll figure something out," Sarah said vaguely. "Mom's been very supportive." "I'm sure she has," I replied, thinking of the offshore accounts Vanessa had been systematically draining, unaware that I had been monitoring every withdrawal, every transfer. The conversation shifted to safer topics: the upcoming anniversary party, the catering, the guest list. I nodded and smiled in all the right places, playing my part one final time. As I prepared to leave, James Jr. unexpectedly ran up and hugged me, a quick, awkward embrace that ended before I could properly return it. "Troy says you were brave in the war," he said, "even if you don't talk about it right." The backhanded compliment, filtered through Troy's dismissive lens, somehow meant more to me than all the medals the Marine Corps had pinned to my chest. It was a tiny acknowledgement from the only truly innocent person in this tragic charade. "Thank you, James," I said, using his proper name deliberately. "That means a lot to me." For a brief moment, I reconsidered the plan. For this boy's sake, perhaps there was another way, a less devastating approach that wouldn't shatter his world, along with everyone else's. But then Troy called out, "JJ, back to practice!" And the moment was gone. My grandson ran back to the man who had stolen my place, eager for his approval, leaving me once again on the outside, looking in. No, I decided as I drove away. The plan would proceed as arranged. My family had made their choices, chosen their allegiances. They had systematically erased me from their lives while benefiting from my sacrifices. In 12 days, at the anniversary party celebrating the marriage they had helped destroy, they would discover exactly who they had been so eager to discard. And may God have mercy on them all, because Colonel James Harrington would not. The morning of the anniversary party dawned clear and cold, appropriate weather for what was to come. I stood before the mirror in my apartment, methodically preparing, as I had for countless missions. Today, however, I wasn't donning combat fatigues, but my formal dress blues, each medal and ribbon precisely placed according to regulations. My fingers traced the Purple Heart, awarded after taking shrapnel in Fallujah, the Bronze Star, with Combat V, for leading my platoon through an ambush in the mountains of Afghanistan, the Silver Star, for an operation that remains classified to this day. Each represented blood spilled, brothers lost, and sacrifices made, while my family lived in comfort an ocean away. My phone buzzed with a message from Bobby. "Assets in position, awaiting your arrival to commence operation." I smiled faintly at the military terminology. Old habits die hard for men like us. I responded with a simple, "Roger that." Before leaving, I opened my safe and removed a thick folder containing documents I'd compiled over the past months. Bank statements showing Vanessa's systematic draining of our joint accounts, transcripts of phone conversations between Elizabeth and Michael discussing how to have me declared incompetent to manage my own affairs. Surveillance photos of Troy meeting with known Russian operatives. Each page represented another link in the chain of evidence that would soon close around them. The drive to the Veterans Club took 20 minutes. I deliberately arrived in my old pickup truck rather than the sleek Mercedes I kept at my office. One final performance as the struggling pensioner before the curtain fell on their carefully constructed narrative. The parking lot was filled with luxury vehicles. Elizabeth's Audi, Michael's Tesla, the BMW SUV I'd secretly purchased for Vanessa last Christmas through a shell company. Among them sat a nondescript van with tinted windows, where I knew Bobby and General Crawford's team were monitoring the situation. The club's manager greeted me at the entrance with the deference due a man who secretly owned the establishment, rather than the pitied veteran my family believed me to be. "Everything is prepared according to your specifications, Colonel," he murmured discreetly. "Thank you, Phillips. Remember, until I give the signal, I'm just an ordinary guest." "Understood, sir." The reception was in full swing when I entered the main ballroom. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the gathered crowd, about 50 people, most of whom I recognized as Troy's fitness clients, Vanessa's country club friends, and my children's business associates. Few of my own acquaintances had been invited, another calculated slight. Vanessa stood near the center of the room, radiant in an expensive gold dress, Troy at her side like a trophy. She faltered momentarily when she saw me in full dress uniform rather than the subdued civilian attire she'd suggested would be more appropriate. "James," she said, recovering quickly as I approached, "I thought we agreed you'd come for dinner only." "Did we?" I replied mildly. "I must have misunderstood. Memory isn't what it used to be, I suppose." Her smile tightened at my reference to the cognitive decline they'd been so eager to establish. "Well, you're here now. There are some canapes near the bar if you're hungry." "I'll wait for dinner," I said, then added with deliberate emphasis, "I've learned patience over the years." Troy extended his hand with false camaraderie. "Looking sharp in the uniform, Colonel. Special occasion." "The most special," I confirmed, shaking his hand firmly. 45 years is a significant milestone, wouldn't you say?" He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable before Elizabeth swept over, champagne flute in hand. "Dad, I didn't expect you so early," she said, her tone suggesting I'd violated some unwritten protocol. "The photographer hasn't even arrived yet." "I'm not here for photographs, Elizabeth," I replied, "just to observe." My cryptic response earned me the patronizing smile she reserved for difficult clients and senile relatives. "Well, try to enjoy yourself. Michael's brought some potential investors he's hoping to impress, so maybe avoid talking about, war," I supplied. "Death, the realities of sacrifice. Don't worry, Elizabeth, I'm not here to embarrass you with the truth." She blinked, unused to such direct confrontation from the compliant father they'd constructed in their minds. Before she could respond, I moved away, circulating through the room, exchanging pleasantries with guests who largely had no idea who I was beyond Vanessa's first husband or Elizabeth and Michael's father, the military one. I watched as my family performed their roles with practiced ease. Vanessa, the elegant hostess who had overcome the burden of a husband perpetually deployed. Michael, the financial wizard whose success came entirely from his own brilliance. Elizabeth, the legal mind who had clawed her way to partnership through determination alone. And Troy, the supportive partner who had stepped in to provide what I apparently couldn't. The carefully crafted fiction of their lives built on the foundation of my sacrifice, my money, my absence while serving the country. At precisely 7:30, Phillips announced dinner. The guests moved to the elegantly set tables, finding their assigned seats. I noted with grim satisfaction that mine was at the far periphery, sharing a table with elderly relatives and family friends too tangential to merit prime placement. Once everyone was seated, Troy stood and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted as he launched into a speech celebrating 45 amazing years, neatly eliding the fact that he'd been present for less than a tenth of that time. While Vanessa and I have only had the pleasure of sharing the most recent chapter of this journey, he said with practiced charm, I feel privileged to help celebrate a union that produced such remarkable children and grandchildren. Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathering. My jaw tightened as he continued, presenting himself as the culmination of a story he had invaded and corrupted. And of course, Troy added, almost as an afterthought, we should acknowledge James's service, both to his country and to this family, in the early years. The early years. as if 4 decades could be dismissed so casually. Vanessa rose to join him, accepting a kiss that drove a final stake through whatever remnants of our marriage might have lingered. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us," she said, scanning the room with a practiced smile that faltered slightly when it reached me. "Family has always been my highest priority, my greatest accomplishment." I almost admired the audacity of the lie. Michael stood next, champagne aloft. "To Mom and Troy," he proposed. "Thank you for showing us what partnership truly means." Elizabeth joined the toast. "To many more years of happiness together." As glasses clinked around the room, I caught Sarah's eye across the tables. Unlike her siblings, she looked uncomfortable, perhaps sensing that something in this carefully orchestrated celebration rang false. The moment had arrived. I reached into my pocket and sent a pre-composed text to Bobby. "Execute." Within 30 seconds, Phillips approached the head table with a message for Troy. I watched his expression change as he read it, confusion giving way to alarm. "Is everything all right?" Vanessa asked, touching his arm. "Just a small issue with the kitchen," Troy lied smoothly. "I'll handle it." As he stepped away, I stood and moved to the small stage where a string quartet had been playing soft background music. The musicians, briefed in advance, fell silent as I approached the microphone. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying the command presence honed through decades of military leadership. "For those who don't know me, I'm Colonel James Harrington, United States Marine Corps, retired." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. This deviation from the planned program clearly wasn't on Vanessa's meticulously arranged schedule. 45 years ago today, I made vows to stand by Vanessa through better or worse, in sickness and in health, I continued. Vows I kept through 3 combat tours in Vietnam, 2 in the Gulf, and 4 in Afghanistan and Iraq. Vows I honored while missing the birth of my first child, my son's college graduation, my daughter's wedding. Vanessa was half standing now, her expression a mix of embarrassment and growing concern. Elizabeth made a slashing motion across her throat, signaling me to stop. Michael was already moving toward the stage, prepared to escort his rambling father away before he could further disrupt their evening. "What my family doesn't know," I pressed on as Michael reached the steps, "is that my service to this country involved more than just leading Marines in combat." The main doors opened and General William Crawford entered in full dress uniform, accompanied by 2 military police officers and several men in suits who I knew were federal agents. A collective gasp rippled through the room. For the past 15 years, I've also been running a private security firm that now employs over 5,000 veterans and holds defense contracts worth billions. I paused, allowing the revelation to sink in. A company that, among other things, owns this club where we're gathered tonight. Michael froze midway up the steps, his face draining of color. Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth. Vanessa remained perfectly still, as if movement might shatter the comfortable reality that was already crumbling around her. I've also been working with military intelligence to identify and track a Russian operative who has spent years attempting to access classified information through my family connections. All eyes turned to Troy, who was being quietly detained at the back of the room. "Anton Trofimov, formerly of Russian military intelligence," I announced, nodding toward the man they knew as Troy, "currently being taken into custody on charges of espionage." The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Vanessa swayed in her chair, her face ashen. "This is absurd," she managed, her voice barely audible over the commotion. "James has become paranoid, delusional." "Mrs. Harrington," General Crawford interrupted, approaching her table, "I assure you, these charges are based on substantial evidence gathered over a 2-year counterintelligence operation. Your companion has been under surveillance since he first established contact with you." While the general continued explaining the situation to a stunned Vanessa, I returned my attention to the broader audience. "I owe all of you an apology for disrupting what you believed was an anniversary celebration. I said. In reality, this gathering was arranged to facilitate the simultaneous execution of several federal warrants. On cue, additional agents entered, moving purposefully toward Elizabeth and Michael. The guests watched in stunned silence as my children were quietly informed of their rights. "Dad, what is this?" Elizabeth demanded, her legal mind already calculating defenses. "Evidence of wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy," I replied evenly. "The same financial crimes you've been committing for years while planning to declare me incompetent and seize control of what you believed was a modest military pension." Michael's face contorted with rage. "You set us up? Your own children?" "No, Michael, I gave you opportunities, multiple chances to demonstrate integrity. Every suspicious investment proposal, every request for help with questionable financial arrangements was a test. Tests you failed consistently, eagerly attempting to defraud a man you believed was struggling with cognitive decline. The agents were professional, discreet, avoiding handcuffs or public humiliation as they escorted my children toward the exits. This wasn't about spectacle or revenge. It was about justice, the same principle I'd defended throughout my military career. Through the chaos, I noticed Sarah standing apart, tears streaming down her face. Unlike her siblings and mother, no agents approached her. She alone had shown a glimmer of conscience, hesitating when presented with opportunities to exploit my apparent vulnerability. I crossed the room to her side. "You're not being charged, Sarah." "But I knew," she whispered. "I knew about Mom and Troy. I knew what Elizabeth and Michael were planning. I didn't stop them." The difference is that when tested, you hesitated," I explained quietly. "You questioned whether what they were doing was right. That doubt, that moment of moral consideration, is why you're standing here while they're being taken into custody." She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. "What happens now?" "Now," I said gently, "we rebuild, not the fiction they created, but something honest." As the room gradually emptied, guests departing in shocked whispers, I found myself standing alone in the center of the ballroom. The elaborate decorations celebrating a marriage that had died years ago now seemed like props in a theater production that had reached its final curtain. Bobby approached, his expression solemn. "You all right, Jim?" "I will be," I replied, removing a medal from my chest, the bronze star I'd earned in Afghanistan. "Have Phillips bring my grandson here. There are some stories about his namesake that he should hear from me, not from the news reports that will follow." Bobby nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. This night wasn't the end of my family story. It was the beginning of a painful but necessary reconstruction. The grandchildren, at least, deserved to know the truth about their heritage, about the meaning of sacrifice and honor. As I waited for James Jr. to arrive, I felt the weight of the past years lifting. The deception was over, both theirs and mine. Whatever came next would at least be built on truth, however uncomfortable. And for a Marine who had survived 4 decades of war, truth, even painful truth, was preferable to the most comforting lie. James Jr. arrived at the nearly empty ballroom with confusion etched across his young face. Phillips had brought him from the children's entertainment room, where the younger guests had been sequestered during the evening's dramatic events. "Grandpa?" he asked tentatively, looking around at the abandoned tables with half-eaten meals and overturned champagne glasses. "Where's everyone? Where's Mom and Grandma?" I knelt to his level, the way I'd done with young Marines facing their first combat deployment, eye to eye, man to man. "They've had to leave, son. There's been a situation that needed their attention." His eyes widened. "Is it because of the men in suits?" Tommy said they looked like FBI agents from the movies. Children notice everything. I nodded, choosing honesty over comforting fiction. "Yes, those men are federal agents. They're doing their job, which sometimes means asking adults difficult questions." "Are Mom and Grandma in trouble?" His voice trembled slightly. "Your mother isn't in serious trouble," I assured him, choosing my words carefully. She's helping the agents understand some complicated grown-up matters. But she asked me to look after you tonight. And this wasn't entirely true. Sarah had been too shocked to make such arrangements, but the boy needed stability amid chaos, and sometimes tactical necessity required adjusting the strict timeline of truth. I removed the bronze star from my pocket, its metal catching the light from the chandeliers above. I want to give you something, James. Do you know what this is? He shook his head, curiosity momentarily displacing his concern. This is called a bronze star. It's given to soldiers who show exceptional bravery in combat. I placed it in his small palm, watching as he examined it with reverence. I received this in Afghanistan, in a place called Kandahar province. Troy said you don't like talking about the war, he said cautiously. Troy was wrong about many things, I replied, my voice gentle but firm. I don't speak of war casually because I respect its gravity, but you're named after me, and after my father before me. You deserve to know your heritage. His fingers traced the star's contours. Did you really fight in a war? Several wars, I confirmed. I served as a Marine for 40 years. What's the difference between a Marine and a soldier? He asked, parroting Troy's dismissive conflation from weeks earlier. I smiled. Marines are part of the naval service. We have our own culture, our own traditions. We're often the first to arrive when trouble starts. Our motto is Semper Fidelis. Do you know what that means? He shook his head again. It means always faithful. It's about loyalty, integrity, and honor, doing the right thing even when it's difficult. His brow furrowed in concentration. Is that why those men took Troy away? Because he didn't do the right thing? The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. Yes, Troy wasn't who he claimed to be. He lied to your grandmother, and to all of us. Oh, did Grandma know he was lying? A complex question that cut to the heart of Vanessa's culpability. I don't think she knew everything, I answered carefully. But sometimes adults ignore warning signs because they want to believe a comfortable story. Phillips approached discreetly. Colonel, the federal prosecutor would like a word when you're available. I nodded acknowledgement. Let's continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable, I told my grandson, rising to my feet. How about ice cream at my place? I have a photo album I'd like to show you. The boy's eyes lit up at the mention of ice cream, that universal peace offering to children caught in adult crossfires. Can I keep the star? He asked, closing his fingers around the medal. It's yours now, I confirmed, along with the responsibility to understand what it represents. As we walked out through the ornate lobby of the Veterans Club, reporters had already begun to gather, alerted by police scanners and the kind of journalistic instinct that smells a significant story. Camera flashes illuminated the night as federal agents escorted Troy, now revealed as Anton Trofimov, into an unmarked SUV. I shielded James Jr. from their view, hurrying him to my waiting car, not the old pickup truck, but the Mercedes I'd instructed Bobby to bring around. No more need for disguises or pretenses. Is that your car, Grandpa? He asked, eyes widening at the luxury vehicle. One of them, I replied, helping him into the passenger seat. There's a lot about me your family doesn't know. During the drive to my real residence, a penthouse overlooking the Potomac, I called Sarah's husband David, explaining in measured terms what had transpired and arranging for James Jr. to stay with me for the night. David, shell-shocked but cooperative, agreed it was best for the boy to be shielded from the immediate fallout. Will Sarah be home tonight? I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral with my grandson listening beside me. They're still questioning her, David replied, his voice strained. The agents said it could be several hours. They're focusing on Elizabeth and Michael first. She'll be released, I assured him. Sarah's involvement was peripheral. Make sure her attorney emphasizes her cooperation. After ending the call, I glanced at James Jr., who was pressing his nose against the window as we passed the illuminated monuments of Washington, D.C. You live here? He asked in awe as we pulled into the private garage beneath my building. For the past 7 years, I confirmed, since before I retired from active duty. The elevator required a fingerprint scan to access the penthouse level. As the doors opened directly into my home, James Jr.'s jaw dropped at the spacious, tastefully appointed living area with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the capital's skyline. "This doesn't look like a soldier's house," he said, clearly comparing it to the sparse apartment I'd maintained for appearances. "Marine," I corrected gently. "And you're right. It's not just a Marine's home, it's also the home of a businessman." While James Jr. explored the space with the uninhibited curiosity of childhood, I prepared 2 bowls of ice cream and set them on the kitchen island. As promised, I retrieved a leather-bound photo album from my study, not the sanitized version Vanessa had curated over the years, but my personal record of 4 decades of service. "This was me when I was not much older than you," I explained, pointing to a photograph of a fresh-faced recruit in boot camp. "And this was my first deployment to Vietnam." Page by page, I shared the history that had been systematically erased from our family narrative. Combat deployments, promotions, the young Marines under my command who had lived and died in service to their country. I showed him photographs of his mother as a toddler, sitting on my lap during brief leaves between assignments. "Why didn't you live here with Grandma?" he asked between spoonfuls of ice cream. "Your grandmother and I grew apart," I explained, simplifying decades of complex estrangement. "Sometimes that happens when people spend too much time separated by circumstances. Like when you were at war." I nodded. "Military service requires sacrifice, not just from the service member, but from their family. Not everyone is equipped for that kind of sacrifice." "Is that why Mom doesn't talk about you much?" The innocent question carried the weight of years of calculated exclusion. "Your mother was very young during many of my deployments," I said. "She grew up hearing one version of our family story. Tonight, she learned there was another version." As the evening progressed, I answered his questions with age-appropriate honesty, neither demonizing his family nor sanitizing the truth. Around 10 o'clock, his eyelids began to droop, the emotional exhaustion of the evening finally catching up to him. I showed him to the guest bedroom, a room I'd secretly prepared months ago in the hope that someday my grandchildren might visit. The walls were adorned with model airplanes and marine life posters, the bookshelf stocked with adventure stories appropriate for a boy his age. "Is this for me?" he asked, running his hand over the baseball-themed comforter. "It's been waiting for you," I replied. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will bring new challenges." After he was settled, I returned to the living room where Bobby was waiting, having let himself in with the key I'd given him years ago. "The initial arrests went smoothly," he reported. "Trofimov is already being interrogated at a secure facility. Elizabeth and Michael have both lawyered up as expected. Vanessa is still being processed. And Sarah, released an hour ago. The federal prosecutor is inclined to offer her immunity in exchange for testimony against her siblings, if needed." I nodded, gazing out at the city lights below. "And the company? Stock will take a hit when this news breaks, but the board has been briefed. The succession plan we prepared is ready to implement." Bobby paused, studying my face. "Any regrets, Jim?" I considered the question carefully. Regret implies I had better options. I gave them every opportunity to choose integrity over self-interest. They made their choices. "And the boy?" Bobby nodded toward the hallway leading to the guest bedroom. "He deserves the truth, presented with compassion," I said. "Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, especially when they're not built on lies." The following morning brought the media storm I'd anticipated. Every major news outlet carried the story. Decorated Marine Colonel uncovers Russian spy operation through family business. The coverage varied from sensationalized accounts of betrayal to more nuanced analyses of counterintelligence operations. I kept James Jr. away from the television, instead taking him to the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico. As we walked through exhibits chronicling the storied history of the Corps, I received periodic updates from my legal team. Elizabeth and Michael had been released on bail, their assets frozen pending investigation. Vanessa remained in custody, her complicity in Trofimov's espionage activities more substantial than even I had suspected. Sarah and David were cooperating fully with authorities, their minimal involvement likely to result in probation at most. That evening, as James Jr. and I ate dinner at my penthouse, Sarah called. Her voice was raw from hours of questioning and likely tears. "Dad," she began, the word itself an acknowledgement of a relationship that had been systematically dismantled. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," I replied. "James Jr. is safe and comfortable. He's handling things remarkably well. The agents showed me everything," she continued, her voice breaking. "The company you built, the properties you own, the foundation for veterans, all while we treated you like a burden," I finished for her. "Yes. Why didn't you tell us? Why maintain the pretense of struggling on a pension?" The question revealed she still didn't fully grasp the depth of my disillusionment. "Would it have changed anything, Sarah? Would knowing I was wealthy have made you respect my service more, value my place in the family more?" Her silence was answer enough. "I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I owned," I explained. When that proved impossible, I needed to know exactly who my family had become in my absence. After assuring her that James Jr. was welcome to stay with me as long as necessary, I ended the call and joined my grandson on the balcony. He was watching aircraft approach Reagan National Airport, their lights tracing paths across the darkening sky. "Will Mom go to jail like Troy?" he asked without preamble. "No," I assured him. "Your mother made mistakes, but she's cooperating to make things right." He nodded, processing this with the straightforward acceptance children often bring to complex situations. "Could I stay with you sometimes, even when everything goes back to normal?" "I would like that very much," I replied, touched by his simple request. "Though I should warn you that things won't go back to exactly the way they were before." "Because of the star?" he asked, referring to the bronze star he'd kept clutched in his pocket throughout our museum visit. "Because of what the star represents," I corrected gently. "Truth, even when it's difficult. Integrity, even when it comes at great cost." As we stood watching the city lights flicker to life below us, I felt a profound sense of closure. The empire I'd built in secret while my family dismissed me as a relic of a forgotten war would now serve its true purpose, not as a weapon of revenge, but as a legacy of service. I had established the Harrington Veterans Foundation years earlier, allocating the majority of my fortune to supporting service members transitioning to civilian life. Now, with my family's betrayal exposed and justice in process, I could focus on that mission without the distraction of maintaining elaborate pretenses. The weeks and months that followed brought significant changes. Trofimov was charged with espionage and facing decades in federal prison. Elizabeth and Michael accepted plea deals that included substantial fines and community service. Vanessa, confronted with evidence of her willing participation in Trofimov's intelligence gathering, received a suspended sentence contingent on her cooperation with ongoing investigations. Sarah and David eventually divorced, their marriage another casualty of the secrets and lies that had defined our family. She took a position with my Veterans Foundation, working to rebuild her life and our relationship brick by painful brick. As for me, I finally stepped fully into the public role I had avoided for years, not just as Colonel James Harrington, USMC, retired, but as the founder and CEO of Sentinel Shield and the architect of one of the most successful private security operations in the country. James Jr. spent alternating weeks with me, learning about his heritage, about the principles of honor and integrity that had guided my life service. I taught him to throw a proper curveball, to tie nautical knots, to recognize the stars that had oriented me during night operations in deserts and mountains across the globe. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the Potomac, he asked the question I'd been expecting since that first night. "Grandpa, are you still angry at them, at Grandma and Mom and everyone?" I considered my answer carefully. "Anger burns energy you can't spare in combat situations," I told him. "Marines are taught to channel emotion into effective action. I'm not angry anymore. I'm focused on rebuilding what can be salvaged and accepting what cannot. Is that what semper fidelis means? He asked. Always faithful, even when people aren't faithful to you? It means being faithful to principles, not just to people, I explained. To doing what's right, even when it's difficult or painful. He nodded, turning the bronze star over in his palm, a gesture that had become habitual for him. I think I want to be a Marine someday, like you. You have many years to make that decision, I told him, resting my hand on his shoulder. Whatever path you choose, remember that the true measure of wealth isn't what you own, but the legacy of integrity you leave behind. As the storm passed and stars began to appear in the clearing sky, I felt a peace I hadn't known in decades. The betrayal that had defined my homecoming had been painful beyond measure, but from its ashes, something new and genuine was emerging. A relationship with my grandson built on truth, a foundation dedicated to serving those who served, and perhaps most surprisingly, the beginning of reconciliation with the daughter who had found the courage to acknowledge her part in my erasure. I had returned from war to discover my family had betrayed me in the most fundamental ways. I had become a millionaire without their knowledge or participation. But in the end, the greatest revelation wasn't the fortune I'd amassed or the justice I'd orchestrated. It was the discovery that even after everything, I could still fulfill my final mission, passing on the values of honor, courage, and commitment to the next generation of Harringtons. And for a Marine who had survived 4 decades of conflict, that was victory enough. It's been 5 years since that fateful night at the Veterans Club. 5 years since justice was served in a way that none of my family could have anticipated. 5 years of rebuilding what was broken and discovering what could never be repaired. I often think about the journey that brought me here, from the battlefields of Vietnam, the deserts of Iraq, and the mountains of Afghanistan, to the most painful battlefield of all, my own home. For 40 years, I served my country with honor, believing that my sacrifice protected not just my nation, but the family I left behind. How wrong I was. The betrayal I discovered upon my return cut deeper than any enemy weapon ever could. My wife, Vanessa, sharing my bed with a man who turned out to be a Russian operative. My children plotting to declare me incompetent and seize control of what they believed was a modest pension. The systematic erasure of my existence from the very family I had sacrificed everything to support. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that during those years of service, I had built an empire. Sentinel Shield, my security firm, had made me a billionaire many times over. The properties they lived in, the businesses they worked for, even the club where they celebrated their betrayal, all secretly owned by the man they had dismissed as a relic of forgotten wars. The night I revealed the truth changed everything. Federal agents arrested Troy, or rather Anton Trofimov, on espionage charges. Elizabeth and Michael faced the consequences of their financial crimes. Vanessa was confronted with her role in compromising national security. Only Sarah, my youngest, was spared the full weight of federal prosecution, having shown the smallest glimmer of conscience when tested. Today, Trofimov serves a life sentence in a federal supermax facility. Elizabeth and Michael have completed their community service, though the professional fallout continues to shadow their careers. Vanessa, after serving her suspended sentence, moved to Florida, where she lives quietly, her social standing irreparably damaged by the scandal. Sarah works with me now at the Harrington Veterans Foundation, slowly rebuilding our relationship through shared purpose. And James Jr., my grandson, spends half his time with me, learning the values of honor, integrity, and service that his parents had tried to erase from our family legacy. My story isn't unique in its betrayal, though perhaps in its resolution. How many veterans return home to find themselves strangers in their own families? How many sacrifice their presence only to discover that absence has hollowed out the very relationships they fought to protect? The difference in my case wasn't the billions I had accumulated in secret. Money didn't heal the betrayal. It merely provided the means to expose it. The true difference was my refusal to accept the narrative they had constructed around me, the outdated veteran, the burden to be managed, the embarrassing relic who couldn't adapt to civilian life. I chose instead to reclaim my story, to reveal not just my financial empire, but the principles that had guided its creation, principles forged in combat and tested in the crucible of betrayal, principles that now form the foundation of my relationship with the next generation of Harringtons. If there's a lesson in my experience, perhaps it's this: true wealth isn't measured in dollars or properties or business holdings. It's measured in integrity, in doing what's right even when it's difficult, in remaining faithful to principles even when others abandon theirs. Semper Fidelis, always faithful, not just a Marine Corps motto, but a way of life. As I sit here in my Pentagon office preparing to review another defense contract that will further expand Sentinel Shield's operations, I think about the cost of the justice I orchestrated, the relationships permanently severed, the family trust irreparably broken. Was it worth it? I believe it was, not for the satisfaction of revenge, but for the restoration of truth. My grandson asked me recently if I regretted exposing his parents and grandmother. Wouldn't it have been easier to just forgive them, he wondered, with the straightforward compassion that children often possess. Forgiveness without accountability isn't mercy, I told him. It's surrender. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is hold people accountable for their actions. He nodded thoughtfully, turning my bronze star over in his palm, a gesture that has become his habit when contemplating difficult truths. So you can forgive them now, after they've faced consequences. I'm working on it, I admitted. Forgiveness is like clearing a minefield. It must be done carefully, methodically, with full awareness of the dangers. That's where I find myself today, carefully navigating the minefield of forgiveness, building what can be rebuilt, accepting what cannot be repaired. The empire I created continues to grow, now with purpose beyond mere accumulation. The Harrington Veterans Foundation has helped thousands of returning service members transition to civilian life, ensuring they don't face the isolation and erasure I experienced. Is this a happy ending? I'm not sure such a thing exists outside of fairy tales, but it's a just ending, and sometimes justice must suffice when happiness proves elusive. My name is Colonel James Harrington, United States Marine Corps, retired. I returned from war to discover my family's betrayal, only to reveal that I had become a billionaire without their knowledge. This is my story, one of betrayal, justice, and the painful rebuilding that follows when truth finally emerges from the shadows of deception. If my story resonated with you, I ask that you subscribe to Revenge Expected for more accounts of justice served and lessons learned through adversity. Each subscription helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives of human resilience and moral courage. The work that goes into creating these videos is substantial. Researching, scripting, filming, and editing requires countless hours and significant resources. Your support through likes and comments not only helps this channel grow, but also signals to others that these stories matter, that truth matters, however uncomfortable it might be. Please take a moment to leave a comment below. Have you experienced betrayal by those you trusted most? How did you respond? Did you seek justice or choose a different path? Your experiences may help others navigating similar painful terrain. Beyond subscribing and commenting, you can support Revenge Expected through our Gracias donation system. Even a small contribution helps cover the costs of production and allows us to bring you new stories daily. This support is crucial to maintaining the quality and frequency of our content, especially as we expand to cover more diverse experiences of justice and redemption. For those who have followed my journey from the beginning, thank you for your unwavering support. For new viewers, welcome to a community built around the principle that truth, however painful, is preferable to the most comforting lie. Remember that while revenge may be expected, justice is earned through adherence to principles that transcend our personal pain. That has been my guiding philosophy as a Marine, as a businessman, and now as a grandfather, passing on these lessons to the next generation. Subscribe, comment, and support through Gracias. Help us continue sharing stories that challenge, inspire, and ultimately remind us all that integrity is the true measure of wealth in this complicated world we navigate together. Semper Fidelis, not just to others, but to the principles that define us when everything else is stripped away.